Thank you for joining me today. Our subject is really going to be about creating inclusive and multicultural environments and really understanding that most of us, especially most of us who live in the Western world, actually have some degree of privilege. Some of us have more privilege than others, but most of us have privilege that we can leverage to create inclusive and multicultural environments. And I have a special guest today from the UK. So stay with me as we talk about him and also the conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest. My guest, his name is Stuart Pickles. Leadership coach Stuart Pickles is managing director of the leadership consultancy Aim Higher Leadership. He works with leaders across sectors, focusing increasingly on how to accelerate the development of the higher levels of leadership required to solve the major challenges of social justice and climate justice facing the world and to build a regenerative future. Formerly a chief financial officer, Stewart spent 25 years working in blue chip companies such as Unilever, Kraft Foods, and Foster's. Located in the UK, he combines commercial and strategic acumen with a deep passion for honoring nature and humanity. So, Stuart, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm welcoming you to the show.
Thank you so much, Karen, and delighted to be with you. And thank you so much for creating this space and for having this really important conversation.
Thank you for being willing to engage in the important conversation. And certainly it's important for us to reach across the ocean, if you will, and to even contact each other from different countries. So
Mhm.
thank you for being a part of that as well. So let me just launch right in, Stuart, and I'm going to ask you some questions. First, over this last year in the United States, we have had the coronavirus pandemic, and we've also had what I've been calling a pandemic of injustice. And this pandemic of injustice has included lots of incidents like police brutality against Black people and other examples of racial unrest, including the storming of the U.S. Capitol building by those who were carrying Confederate flags and also wearing and carrying symbols of anti Semitism. So that's what's been going on in part in the United States. What's been the racial, ethnic, and social justice climate in the UK over the last year?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Karen. I mean, obviously, COVID-19 has impacted us, and I think in similar ways in our countries. But obviously, the social justice, what I call the social justice issues in the US, and all that's come to the into the the foreground of all of our awareness. With the brutal murder of George Floyd, and everything that's followed. That you'd be amazed at how much that has been also in the media and in the psyche of everybody here in the UK as well, and it is I mean, it's also brought to our attention, and there's been a lot of things that have been brought out in the media and to our attention about similar kind of injustices in our criminal justice system as well. Maybe some people would argue not so extreme, but actually, I think the interesting thing is I think there's a lot more of it here than people realize. I think it's probably less obvious, but still there, and so that's been coming into the awareness, and been listening to, watching. There's been a lot of programs and TV coverage now. One of the interesting things is that we have a lot of statues in the UK which celebrates people who were, who became rich and powerful because of their involvement in the slave trade originally, and so there was one very famous moment in the middle of last summer, soon after. I can't remember when it was exactly. Sometime later in the summer, when a statue of one of those people in Bristol was actually pulled down and thrown into the the quay, the lock, the dock of the water there, just by in the sea, in the harbour, and there's been a big conversation about to what extent should we remove all of these statues, and anybody who's complicit, who was complicit in slavery, and all of the gains of that should be removed. And of course, the conversation moves on there, and there's been some people even calling for removal of statues of Churchill because of his involvement in racism. So there's been a lot of really heated discussions, especially in the universities, and just more generally in the public dialogue. So very much so in the public consciousness. Although a lot of the stimulus for that has come from what's been happening and the very powerful images of the things we've seen in America.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stuart, for letting us know the impact also in the UK. And something that's similar between what you said about the UK and what I see also going on in the US is this. Lots of incidents have been happening for many, many years here in the United States. However, not everyone has been aware of those incidents. If you are a Black person, you know about police brutality. As long as I've been living and around, which has been a long time, I've been aware of it. Many of my white friends and colleagues, less aware. They don't know the extent to which this is really highly prevalent. It's not just a one off kind of a situation. So it sounds like 2020, which I've referred to as the vision year, has
Mhm.
allowed us to see some things which we normally might not see or might not realize are going on. And then now we say, oh, okay, there's more happening than what I thought was occurring. And you're saying in the UK, maybe even more so, that sort of like disparity between the reality and what people recognize as the reality.
That's right, Karen. And in the article I wrote recently, which I know you read, one of the things I spoke about was I was the other metaphor that I was using. It was almost like the permafrost is melting, and as the ice is melting, we're beginning to see, all of the injustices that were hidden and frozen for forever, actually. It's very difficult, I think, for everybody to come to terms with it, but it's there and it's real, and we have to face up to the reality of it.
Absolutely. And so thank you. I'm glad that you, amongst a growing number of people who are recognizing the need to face up to it. So, Stuart, tell me a little bit about what's really happening in the workplaces in the UK. I know that you work in a consultative way in many companies and corporations there in the UK. So, how are these issues impacting the workplace there, these issues of social justice or racial and ethnic diversity?
Well, my understanding is that it's probably not that dissimilar to the US in the sense that we have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a um, let's say almost a strategic priority for most organizations that really have very much interest in their reputation now. I think it's moved beyond something that's an option. It's something that's very certainly the major organizations. I would say all of them will have diversity, equity, inclusion right up the top of their strategic priorities. Whether or not what they're doing about it is making enough progress is another question. And I think you and I spoke about this before about how some unconscious bias or training, as we call it in the UK. In the US, you call it something slightly different. What's the word that you use? Not unconscious bias, but implicit bias. That's right. That's right. Forgive me. I remember there was different words in the US and the UK, and I think some of that training potentially is it in danger sometimes of being a tick box exercise? I think maybe it can be. I can speak about my own experience a little bit later of an unconscious bias, diversity, equity, inclusion workshop that I attended. I commissioned actually for my business and for my team, which was incredibly effective and very disruptive, and has probably the reason why I'm on this show today. So, and I do believe that there's many great people doing many great things, but I think we've got a long way to go.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Stuart, that there is certainly a tendency at times like this to do lip service, if you will, or what we used to call in the military window dressing, so that it looks like you're doing the right thing when in fact you're really not doing anything that's truly going to move the needle. So, how do you get past or beyond even taking a statue down. What is going to make a difference for the person that's living today in terms of their economic reality, their health reality, and their opportunity to really have a living wage and a good life? And so when I think about the corporate sense, I know that there have been many companies in the US over the years who definitely would just want to check off the box. Yes, we did our diversity training, but we have not changed a thing about, our policies, our practices. We're not conducting internal audits. In other words, we've remained the same, and but we can say we're doing the right thing. I think in the US, this is manifested a lot with people putting out statements. Different companies are putting out statements in support, of people of color at a time like this, which is important. It's just that it's the early beginning stages, and you've got to go further than that. And
Right.
so I'm really happy to see you say that as well.
Yeah, no, for
So
sure.
tell us a little bit more, Stuart, then about what you've been learning personally about social justice and your own privilege in this climate.
Mm. Well, I mentioned that that workshop that we had, and they had a facilitator who came. We actually ran the workshop in my house, in my living room, with just a group of about 10 of us. And uh, this Razia Aziz is her name. She works for the Equality Academy in the UK, and highly recommend her. And she came in, and she she held the mirror up, really, to me and to us. One of the things that we're painfully aware of is that as things stand in that group, there's no people of color. So that's one of the things that we start with, realizing that that's something which is an issue for us to hold. But more importantly, what is our awareness of our privilege, and um, and just holding that mirror up. And she said to me, look at you, you're living in this privilege, you're living in it with this privilege day in, day out. And it was hard. I to be honest, initially it felt quite rude. You invite somebody into your house, and I've never invited anybody in my house. And normally people thank you for your hospitality and they're very polite. And but I got over that. It took me a while, but when I really reflected afterwards, it made me realize that it was the disruption I needed. And that's what's led me on this journey. And so a bit of upset and a bit of pain at the start, but actually it's brought me to a place now where I'm really invigorated. I've, along the journey, read a number of books, which I mentioned in the article. The White Fragility, by Robin DiAngelo, Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo Lodge. And just the levels of learning and challenge which come from this learning. It's very hard, but it's also very rewarding. And I feel, as I say, I feel invigorated and ready to do more. And realizing that it's actually a lifetime's of work as well. It's not something that you can solve in any short time period.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of companies sometimes don't recognize that once you make a decision to walk in this direction, this is a long-term commitment. It's not a short-term issue at
Yeah.
all. You don't just do one training program and that's the end. We're talking about major culture change. We're talking about really making some huge strides to doing things in a different way. And I like what you said about how that the person who came to assist actually held up the mirror. And sometimes we don't like what we see, in the mirror. Maybe some hairs are out of place. Maybe there's a pimple on your face. Maybe something's wrong with your clothing, whatever. However, if you don't have the mirror, then you don't have an opportunity to make an adjustment. You don't have an opportunity to change. And so, first of all, I applaud you for being willing to look in the mirror. And then, secondly, to go to the level where now you feel invigorated and are willing to step forward and do something different. So you've already started a major journey with all the readings that you're doing, the article that you wrote. So what are you learning at this deeper level from all of your experiences about, social justice? What are you learning? What's been the biggest insight from some of that learning?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that particularly stand out. One is, and Razia said this to us, privilege comes with penalty. Once you realize that your privilege means that somebody lacks privilege, then you realize that there's a penalty attached to that. You can no longer, once you realize that, you can no longer enjoy your privilege without realizing that somebody else is disadvantaged as a result. So that was quite a hard-hitting insight, which really got me thinking. We talked a lot about privilege, and one of the things which really helped me to start understanding more about this was this notion that privilege is the absence of barriers. So if you have barriers, of course you will see them. But if there's an absence of barriers, you don't see them, because by definition you can't see what's not there. And I think that a lot of people have this privilege but don't realize it because they don't know what it means to have a lack of privilege. They don't know what those barriers even would look like. So, and I think I was one of those many white people who believed that I was non-racist. I would say that I didn't see color as a reason for differentiating between people, and I thought that I was genuinely being fair in all of my dealings with people. I'm sure there were cases where I wasn't, but I certainly, my intention was, I thought good. But it's not good enough to be, I mean, well, the thing about colorblindness is that if that saying that is it's color blindness, and what that's saying is that you're not seeing a person of color for their lived experience, which is fundamentally different to that lived experience of somebody, a white person, or anybody of privilege for that matter. I mean, this is a wider conversation than just race, I think, but obviously this is the context that we're talking about it. And I'm a white man, straight, cisgendered, and have all of those in all of those different contexts, that the privilege. So it's not just about race, but it's particularly in the context of race. I'm realizing probably more, the biggest learning of all is that it's not good enough to be non-racist. We have to be anti-racist. And the other thing, and this is a really interesting kind of concept, which I think is really important and really crucial to helping white people unlock almost this kind of gridlock that a lot of white people are in, which is that this is too difficult a subject for them, because they equate, if somebody says to a white person, you're racist, they immediately mean that it must be intended. The white person interprets that as meaning that it's intended. And so long as there's a feeling that there's an accusation of intention, then there's a rejection of that, there's a defense of that, and the wall goes up. Racism doesn't have to be intentional. We can be well-intentioned, but we are still complicit in a system which perpetuates the social injustice, as I call it, the disadvantage, the prejudice, and everything that goes with it. And so in order to be non-complicit, it's not just about not having intention, it's about having a positive intention to stop the complicity by doing something about it. And there are many examples of that, and we can talk more about that. But that's I think that's the fundamentally the most important insight and learning that's come out of this for me.
I want to highlight a few of the things that you mentioned. You were talking about, the absence of barriers if you're on the privileged side. And you're also talking about I call it the cost, what it cost really to be in a situation where one group is privileged and let's say some other groups are not. That means somebody's paying something, and you may not even be fully aware of the price that those others are paying, but they're paying. And it reminds me of an illustration I once saw. I saw a picture where there were people in a restaurant enjoying the food and having a wonderful time. And from their vantage point, there was a sign on the door of the restaurant, and facing them, the sign on the door said open. And so there were people outside the restaurant who they could see at the door. and they weren't coming in. And so the people inside were wondering, well, how come these people aren't coming in? And they didn't understand that on that side of the door, the sign said closed. And so I think it's such a great illustration that when you're inside, let's say where the privilege is, the door is open. You don't see a problem. You don't see what the people outside the door are facing and the barriers that are up for them, the roadblocks, barriers in that sense, that are there. And so I think that's really an important point of what you said. And it's not enough to just say, okay, I'm a colorblind person. Colorblind means, like you said, you're not seeing things. Many people have believed that that's the objective. The objective is not to become colorblind. It's actually to be more aware of one another and to
Exactly.
go a little bit deeper. And you're doing two things. You're stopping something. You mentioned the anti-racism part, and you're also starting something. You're increasing inclusion. You're increasing more in that way. So it's a twofold thing, something stopping and something starting. And a lot of times people don't understand you if you just stop something and you don't put in something new, something worse may come along, in a sense. So you have to be intentional about what you're also building and also what you're creating. So I just wanted to highlight those things in what you said, because I think that's really so significant, those
Yeah.
points.
Yeah. No, thank you, Karen.
So, what insights relate to the work that you and your company are called to do today? Tell me a little bit about how this is affecting the work that you do, and also what you may have to do internally and who you are to do that work.
Hmm. Goodness me. I guess this answer would have to we have to think about it on a number of different levels. Really, I think the work has to start with self. Um, Initially, I think we have to go in and really do quite a bit of this work on our own, um, uh, to understand, um, not only understand our privilege, but understand the extent to which our behaviour um, may be impacted by the privilege and the lack of awareness of the disadvantage of others. When it comes to, so I'm a leadership coach and I work with a team of colleagues, and as I say, we had that meeting, and we've had further workshops and conversations, and it continues to shape what we do. And it's led to me writing this article, coming on a show like this, and I'm going to be working in some D&I workshops going forward, um, and really engaging with clients on this conversation on this subject as well. And I've had clients coming to me and talking about situations where they may have had some complaints about, from people about racism in the culture, um, and being able to sit alongside people who face that challenge, and helping them to work their way through it without you know dealing with the guilt, and the fear. I think is what those are probably the hardest things to get over, I think. And they're such unhelpful emotions. They naturally arise, I think, initially anyway, um, but they are so unhelpful. They really paralyze, and repel an individual from moving towards engagement and action. So I think that's an awareness of that, and the ability um, help people through conversation um, to start exploring that, and opening themselves up to the journey. And I know that the journey is one of those phrases people like to use, but I do think it's a journey, and I think it's a long journey, and we just have to take it one step at a time. But it's important that we take the steps, and we don't worry, we do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said earlier too, where you said sometimes the barriers or the racism that exists is not intentional.
Mm.
And a lot of times when people feel blamed or it's an in your face kind of an experience where fingers are pointing at them, that's when the guards go up and the shields go up. And you also mentioned there's that sense of guilt and fear and so on. So what have you found that really works at the feeling level so that people can get past that and maybe get to some feelings that are more facilitative of the forward progression? And how have you felt yourself even and engaging all this and going forward?
Mm. Yeah, well, I spoke earlier about the upset and the hurt. I've talked about the guilt and the fear. Those are those when you ask me how have I felt, those I'll say those words again. Those have been the feelings that one has had to work with, and I think I do think that intention piece is a really important kind of key to the lock. I think that so long as a white person or a person of privilege feels they're being accused of doing something intentionally, when they are convinced that they're not doing anything intentionally, or with any bad intention, then that's where I think that the door just won't open. I think if you can help open the mind to the fact that there are things that need to be addressed in the system, and that it isn't any intentional, there's no intention on your part that this is happening, but and so letting go of that, and then there's a liberation. There's a liberation, which means that you can then, okay, so now with that, you can clear your conscience there to that degree, in terms of there's no accusation of an ill intention, but there's still work to be done, and that's to look hard at the mirror of to demonstrate the privilege, and then look beyond the mirror to see what's on the other side, and to see the disadvantage that sits as a on the other side of the coin, and the more that you can then sit alongside. I think that one of the things that I started doing with the invitation from the books that I've read and the things that people have said, is to take myself back to the situations where I've been in a situation of disadvantage and of prejudice and of the two best examples in my case are ones of bullying. The one or two people, older boys at school, who would come and get you into a corner where there were no teachers or anybody else around, and hit you a couple of times, and really hard, and threaten you to do much worse if you tell anybody, and that feeling of being completely powerless. I think most of us have experienced in some levels in our lives some degrees of this kind of injustice. And I also in my work life came across one or two really extreme examples of people who were in positions of power and abusing it and bullying people, and being on the receiving end of that myself, and just realizing just how how powerless and one feels, and how angry one feels. So I think viscerally going back to, and that's kind of, so then that's one way that at least you can somehow put yourself into the shoes. I'm not suggesting that those injustices are anything compared to the injustices of people of color. I would want to make that really clear, but at least there's some degree of being able to empathize and realize. And then if you multiply that by 100 or 1,000 times, that's what's going on for people of color. So those would be a couple of things.
I really like the fact that you're talking about being able to empathize with others by going back to incidents, even in your own life, maybe not exactly the same, but the feeling of powerlessness, at least in your situation. And I do believe that a lot of the foundation of forward progression does involve empathy, and it involves some conversations and some sharing, between people to understand what others have experienced and what others are going through and have gone through that we might not always know or might not always be aware of. And then secondly, you mentioned the importance of looking at the systems. a lot of times we want to look just individually and define racism as something that someone's thinking or feeling internally, when in fact there's so many systems that are set up in place that have become almost invisible to us. Systems in corporations, systems in governments that have differential impacts. And we have to examine them, even if we can't see what the differential impacts are right away. We have to at least be willing to look at them to uncover what they could be, and to listen to those people from different groups who might be like those ones on the outside of the restaurant seeing the closed sign. We don't know sometimes what others are experiencing at the system level until we investigate a little further. So I'm really glad you brought both of those up, the empathy piece and also the system piece. They're both quite important in terms of moving forward.
Mm.
Now, Stuart, many people of color get very concerned about whites who want to, quote, help.
Yes, I know.
and, and they fear, that white privilege, if you will, is going
Mhm.
to be used as yet another means to
Yep.
call the shots, to shape the narrative. So,
Yep.
how will you avoid these outcomes and establish true partnership as you move forward?
Mm. Yeah, this is I think this is one of the hardest things. And even now, I can sit here now and say, what's my motivation for being here? Is it to somehow assuage my guilt? Is it to somehow make myself look better? And it's quite difficult to be 100% confident that there's none of that in there. And I think part of being truly authentic is to say that maybe there is a bit of that. But I think one has to look really deep into one's intentions and to think about. For me, it's just a much wider picture of. I want to. The legacy I want to leave is to create a better world um, where the injustices of the past are not perpetuated. But that doesn't really answer your question. I mean, it's a good example. I'm in conversation with somebody at the moment, a person of color, and together we're talking about running an unconscious bias workshop with a group of people. It's more of an inquiry, really. I think we're sort of even wondering about what to call it in order for it to try and break more ground than perhaps some traditional workshops of this nature. And I'm wanting very much to lead it. And I'm noticing that desire, and I'm also wanting very much and trying very hard to pull back and allow my partner to work through what um, what will work best, and to what extent will it be my voice, and to what extent will it be hers. How can my voice be brought in a way that complements, but doesn't take center stage. It's back to the whole white centering problem. And the extent. I mean, I'm aware of that risk. Have I completely worked out how to avoid it yet? Probably not. I think it's a work in progress. But I think
It's
awareness is a big part of that.
absolutely awareness is a big part of it. And it's quite insidious, meaning
Yes.
we can think that we're not doing it. And in fact, we really might be. And you know what? Sometimes people allow those, I'll say, risk to cause them not to even step into the arena.
Right.
And what I would say is that we all can grow even as we engage this work and even as we work together. And you will learn, you will get feedback from your partner to give them permission to give you feedback when you might be inadvertently be showing up in a way that reflects, let's say, that the white privilege background and don't even know it, not even aware of it. If we don't talk to each other honestly, we don't share and give feedback and say, here's what that feels like right now to me. I wonder what else we could do besides what we're doing at the moment, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I think about the whole business of partnership, there's a saying that is often said over here quite often amongst people of color about interventions. And they'll say, nothing about us without us.
Mhm.
So you really, the objective is the co-creation and being able to see together what's going on And for those who may be in an affected community, having their voice very large about what they're experiencing and what they think they need. And
Mm.
then you would lend, if you will, your privilege towards the, resolution and the outcome as defined by those who will be benefiting. And of course, the truth is the whole society benefits when we are really addressing, these issues that we're talking about. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I would certainly encourage you to, yes, engage the learning, not be afraid. You're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think that's, it comes back to my point earlier about fear. I think if one can be paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes, and I've made so many, my God, um, it's so easy to stumble and fall. And then also inviting the feedback, and I think most importantly, reacting appropriately to the feedback. I think if there's if one doesn't respond well to feedback, then the feedback will stop coming and you'll stop learning. So I think
exactly.
that's probably the most maybe that's the most important of all, actually. If people can really feel that they can give you feedback, then they will.
Absolutely. And then you both can grow because you're both going to give each other feedback. You grow and you learn together. So what other recommendations do you have for white people about how to best approach multiculturalism, diversity, equity, inclusion, all these things we've been talking about? What else would you say to them?
I feel as though it may be a distillation of some of the things we've already said. I think one of them is to is to really think deeply about this question of intention, to let go of the belief that um, to be racist you have to be doing it intentionally, and that actually, at some level it's okay. It's okay. There's a reassurance in a way that I would encourage um, giving people, that white people, to say you're not being accused of doing this intentionally. You're being invited to come and join a dialogue about things which we can do something about, and that frame is so different. And that, by doing that, then I think there is this possibility of people letting go of their fear, letting go of their guilt, all of which paralyzes action and frees people up to actually do something about it, and feel and enable them to enter the fray, and enter the dialogue, and start the learning. um, and as I say, that's a learning journey which I believe will probably never end for me. It's extraordinary. I mean, since my mind was open to this, the amount of things that I've found myself exposed to, or seeking out, and reading and watching and learning about, and conversations, amazing. I watched James Baldwin, I'm Not Your Negro, that amazing film. I hadn't seen that before. There's a great black British historian here in the UK called David Olusoga, who's put together an amazing series talking about racism in the UK. There's just so many examples, and so open your mind and get ready for a learning journey.
That's actually great advice, and I love the fact that you are highlighting the conversations that are really going to be necessary that people have together in moving forward. So, how can people reach you later? Where can they get in touch with you, Stuart?
Oh, probably easiest just to give you my email address, which is Stuart, Stuart, at aimhigherleadership.com. That's all one word, aimhigherleadership.com. And our website is www.aimhigherleadership.com.
Thank you very much for sharing that information. I'm sure some people may want to contact you to continue some conversations with you, even on this subject. So, as we are preparing to kind of say that again, Stuart?
Sorry to interrupt. I would love that. I would really welcome any conversations, and you can also get me on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. So, as we're preparing to sort of wrap up and close our conversation today, what words of wisdom do you want to leave for my audience of executive business leaders?
Mm. In a nutshell, I think it would be the phrase, racism doesn't mean intention. I think that one phrase is the key that can unlock this conversation.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Stuart, for being with me today and also for sharing with my audience your wonderful experiences. You know, in other words, 2020 was an eye-opening year, and we're now heading into what I'm calling the year of impact to really do something about all of these issues that we've seen and observed.
It's been a very great pleasure, Karen. I know that we will be continuing our conversation on this subject, and I look forward to engaging with others and broadening the dialogue and being part of the change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the part you're already taking in the change. And so, what I'd like to say to my audience out there as we're wrapping things up is just remember, as our guest Stuart said today, that it's not about intention. Many times we are complicit in activities without intending anything. And sometimes there's systems that exist that we didn't even put in place. However, we can help to change those systems. It's what we can do for good as we move forward. And that's what we want to focus on is what can we do together that makes a difference and that really moves the needle. Or in the language that I might use, we are really creating co-created partnership as the way forward in our society and in our societies, because it's multiple in a sense. So all of us must recognize the privilege that we each have. It's even a privilege for me to be able to speak to you on this podcast. And I have opportunities to use this platform to also bring voices to you that you might not hear as often, and ideas and thoughts to carry forward in a different way. So change, it starts with us getting to know each other across international geographic boundaries, across different ethnic backgrounds and boundaries. And as we get to know one another and have conversations such as what Stuart and I had today, I think we're going to see some major change as we walk together in a different direction. So I want to thank you as my audience for joining me today. And I want to leave you with today's biblical words of wisdom. And they come from Luke, the 12th chapter, verse 48b. And it says, "For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required. And to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more."